and welcome to this episode of Tripology. I'm Alan, and I'm here with the ever-insolvent Adam.
Oh, good morning, Alan. How are you?
I'm really good today. It's my favourite type of episode because, first and foremost, Tripology isn't just about travel as a wide objective. It's about the travel community, and we love talking to people who travel. And on this week's episode of the podcast, we're interviewing an entrepreneur, a traveller, and the founder of thebrokebackpacker.com. I'd like to introduce the listening audience to Will Hatton.
Ahoy, friends. Thank you for having me on the show. New finder of your show, but already a lifelong fan, so thank you for having me here.
So amazing to have you on, Will. I've been reading your blog and learning about you over the last couple of weeks, and I have to say I'm a real fan of your travelling insights, so it's an honour to have you on Tripology.
Oh, well, I'm honoured. We're honoured all round, so that's good stuff.
So I guess first and foremost, let's tell the listeners a little bit about you from your perspective. What is it that you do and why are you here on Tripology today?
What do I do? I do a few things, but starting at the beginning, if we cast our eyes back to 14, 15 years ago, I washed up in the subcontinent of India, a place I believe both of you gentlemen have some experience. And I spent a couple of years wandering around India as a penniless, headstrong youth, which was an incredible experience. I was hitchhiking, I was sleeping in train stations, I was buying T-shirts and selling them on the beach. And that was my life for a couple of years. And along the way, I started my rambling newsletters, and that evolved into my one-man band travel blog, which had 14 users in the year of 2014. It was a very exciting time. Flash forward to today, and my site is one of the biggest sites out there. We get about 1 million users a month. I've been traveling pretty much non-stop, besides COVID, which I feel like was a pretty good excuse. And I found myself in many far-flung lands, with some of my favorites being Iran, Pakistan, Myanmar, Venezuela. And today I'm living in Bali about half of the year, where I run a very special hostel for very special people. But I'll tell you more about that later.
Nice. I think one of the cool things about having you on the podcast is that we deal with the overarching term travel and travellers, but there's so many different categories. And one of the key things that we come up against is like finance, the issue of finance, and then the issue of how do we do this for a long time. And you're someone who your whole blog was based around the idea of inexpensive travel on a budget, which obviously we find incredibly attractive. And then the other thing is that you have this crazy entrepreneurial spirit. Like, you've managed to find a way to earn money whilst traveling since day one, pretty much, right? I remember learning about you selling trinkets that you found in India and bringing them back to the UK, and bringing them back home where you would sell them for a profit. So really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely started off just with the goal to see as much as possible, and was very comfortable being uncomfortable. So I was fine sleeping rough, sleeping on benches. Did a lot of couch surfing. That was luxury for sure. A lot of hitchhiking, worked a lot of random jobs. And along the way, I found that there really wasn't very many resources for people who were traveling like how I was traveling. It seemed like most of the travel books, the travel blogs that were out there were aimed at people who were traveling on like $50 a day. And I was like, I don't think I've ever had $50, like this, where do I find $50? And I'd stretched out for like, a week at least. So I just got very obsessed with the idea of teaching other people how to have these experiences traveling abroad, because for me, I found that there was so many opportunities like for personal development on the road, but also there's like a lot of opportunities to make money. I mean, I bought all kinds of random things, from silver jewelry to leather satchels to colorful hippie shirts, back from my travels, and sold them at festivals or sold them on the side of the road. I've worked all kinds of random jobs whilst traveling, and I think my evolution from broke backpacker to like an entrepreneur has just been one where I've really found a passion for spotting opportunities and blogging about it. So yeah, it's been a wild ride.
It's incredible to hear you speak about it, because I would describe you as the backpacker's backpacker and also the entrepreneur's entrepreneur. You know,
That's
it's
very
just
kind of you.
amazing. But honestly, like reading some of your stories, they're incredible. And when I think about the way that I travel, I deliberately travel very cheaply. Maybe not as cheaply as you have, but it's not necessarily out of necessity. I just prefer traveling that way because I know my budget goes further, and I think you meet a certain type of person when you're staying in hostels, for example. But you were able to travel for such long periods, and it sounds like it was out of necessity to a certain extent that you couldn't spend more than say $10, $15 a day sometimes.
Yeah, so my overall budget was $10 a day for many, many years. And that $10 a day would mostly be stretched out for visas, right? So I'd have like a whole week's budget would go on a visa. But like you guys, part of the reason that I love traveling cheap is the barriers between you and the experiences that you can have in the places that you're traveling through, and the normal day-to-day people who you can meet when you're traveling in that style, it all just melts away. You've just got the opportunity to really step into the local culture, meet local people, through experiences like couch surfing and hitchhiking. You see parts of the country and explore parts of the culture that you just wouldn't have access to otherwise. Whereas, if you are traveling in a more expensive style, I think that a lot of the time you end up kind of hiding behind a mobile phone or like behind a five-star hotel, and you just don't have the same kind of interactions that you can have when you're traveling, or like a hippie from the 70s, basically.
It's amazing that you managed to capture that mindset as well, like a hippie from the 70s, because traveling in the modern day is obviously so different. I often think, God, how amazing would it have been to travel back when like a guidebook was your only methodology for finding where you need to go. I remember in an article I read by you talked about the idea that you like to go to places that weren't in the Lonely Planet guide. And I think that's also a really cool mindset to have whilst traveling.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are still many places out there where you can really have that experience. You just have to be a little bit creative and be willing to go to places that maybe don't get the best media coverage. I think that nowadays you really have to make the effort to have those kind of adventures, because it's very easy due to just like being connected to maps and being connected to apps which enable you to like connect with people without ever having to actually say hello. It's very easy to pass through these countries and to really just not have the kind of immersive experience that you could do.
I think it's easy as well just to get swept up in the trip. Like we're constantly talking about, you don't need that much money to travel. You can make a budget, construct it however you want, but it's so easy to just get swept up in the idea that I'm not at home and therefore I'm on holiday. And that's a mindset that kind of ends up creeping into your head while you're traveling. And it's impressive that you had such an entrepreneurial spirit from day one. Can you talk a little bit about how that led into the creation of this website? Were you aware that it was a somewhat unique mindset going into it? Is that why the broke backpacker became a thing?
I think the thing with the broke backpacker is when I was traveling around India, I was going into like deepest, darkest India, and there really wasn't much more than a footnote in like this battered Lonely Planet I had that was like just stuck together with gaffer tape. And I was like, okay, there's not much info there. I'm going to head over there and see what I can find. And whilst exploring these like lesser visited corners, I was just like, people need to know about this. People need to have the opportunity to have these kind of experiences. And I think from an entrepreneurial point of view, I just learned one lesson really early, which is that if you can get something from A to B, you can charge more in B than what you paid for it in A. And, I had a thumb. I had a pretty big backpack. I was always just stuffing it full of stuff. I was like, oh, that's shiny. I reckon I can get a tenner for that back home. And that's pretty much how it started, to be honest.
That's really cool. I think that's probably an aspect of travel that I've not really delved into. Like I always had a carry-on bag. I never thought about that sort of thing whilst I was traveling. But it goes to show there are just so many different ways to travel. And for people whom cost is like a primary concern, they can think about doing that. It can be a smart business decision to go traveling, right?
Yeah, it definitely can. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, where I was from, there wasn't very many opportunities. Like I did do some jobs in the UK, and I was making like minimum wage, freezing my ass off, unloading lorries at 5 a.m, and I was like, yeah, I'm not sure this is for me, to be honest.
Yeah, I think you've just touched on the operative word there, Will. Opportunity. You seem like an opportunist in every sense of the word.
Yeah, I quite like spotting opportunities, and I quite like pointing out opportunities to my audience and to other people I meet along the way. And I'm just passionate about travel, and I'm passionate about the opportunities for personal development whilst on the road, right? You know, like I feel like if you're on the road long enough, you can really forge who you want to be, and you can be introspective, and you can decide, you know, this is who I am, this is what I stand for. And I think that's really important because, like, in today's society, maybe a lot of us don't know who we are and what we stand for. So throw yourself out there and see what happens. And I think being on the road and finding different ways to support yourself and different ways to drive yourself forward, it puts you out of your comfort zone, but like that's what it's all about at the end of the day.
Personal development, isn't that such an important thing? I like this because I think it might speak to a different subsection of our audience. Me and Adam are always parroting on about just go traveling, change your life, leave mundanity, get on a plane. But I think there's a certain aspect of humanity which is this drive to, well, actually I want to achieve, and unless I have some guarantee of personal development or economic development or something that I'm going to get as the end result of getting on this plane, then maybe I don't want to take that risk. Travel seems like this risky thing. So I think listening to you maybe speaks to that section of the audience, and there's a lot to be gained by going out and having these experiences on the road. I think what I'd like to talk to you about is perhaps the absence of a social media drive on the Broke Backpacker. Me and Adam are always sort of lamenting the Instagramification of travel to the extent that it's taken place. I think it's this unrealistic side of travel. People have sort of sensed that travel is big at the moment. People want to travel, and therefore it gets reduced to this idea of a blue lagoon and someone attractive diving in. Just come here. But travel is obviously for us so much more than that. And I think it's noteworthy that your blog shies away from that sort of thing and deals with actual real world travel on a budget. There's not much of a social media presence. Is that a product of the time in which it was created, or is that a very kind of cognitive decision you've made?
So actually, we were like very successful on social media, and it just destroyed my mental health. So I quit like 5 years ago. I completely blew up on Snapchat when I was like hitchhiking across Iran and up through Pakistan. I opened this like little guest house up in the mountains, and I was like, "Come to Pakistan, explore Pakistan. It'll cost you 800 quid, and I'll take you around, and we can go on some glaciers." And some people bought it through Snapchat, and I was like, "Fuck, shit! I guess I've got to sort out a minibus." But yeah, like we had a lot of success, and I think it was actually a crucial part of our journey in that the tour company that I launched, doing tours to Pakistan and Iran, which I launched all through Snapchat, that was what gave me the funds to be able to hire some other writers to come and help me grow the site. But I just found social media really detracted from my own experience. I found myself looking at stuff more and more through my phone than through my eyes. I didn't like it. Like, some people didn't like me, and I cared about it way more than I should, and just found myself thinking about it. And I was like, you know what? I'm done. And I just quit Snapchat. And like we have Instagram. I post on it like once a month. It's pretty. I don't really want to play that game either, because despite my like personal objectifications to objections to social media, I feel like it's hard. It's also hard to drive traffic successfully through social media now, because I was an early adopter and was successful and then quit. And we very much started up like a small attempt at it again now. But pretty much all of our traffic, all of our audience is through SEO and email marketing. And, you know, I'm a wordsmith, man. Like, all my original blog posts, they were like 15,000 words with not a single picture. And that's how they were. And I do worry that perhaps the way people are consuming content is changing, and maybe I am very much out of date. But yeah, ultimately, I think that, like, for me personally, it just wasn't the right decision. And like you said, I think that it shows travel in this way that maybe isn't completely honest or completely authentic.
I think it also, like, far from being outdated necessarily, it shows that there's different ways that you can do things and still be successful in a realm that is becoming increasingly dominated by a specific genre. I think it's really cool. There's going to be a lot of people out there who aren't necessarily au fait with social media, but still want to do something in the creation space. And I think that you're evidence that that can be successful.
Absolutely, and I think that like there is so much you can do creatively when you're on the road, and I feel if you're going on a long trip, to not do something is a mistake because you're ultimately going to spend a lot of time waiting around, right? So learn to juggle, learn to do poi, learn to do a backflip, learn to write, learn to do poetry, learn to do something. Otherwise, you're just going to end up on your phone anyway, right? But I feel like there is a lot of different ways to build a business and to even build a business within travel without social media. It's just the thing is that social media is the most visible way of doing it. That's what people seem to automatically think when they're like, oh, I want to build a business out of my travels.
Yeah, I wondered if for a moment we could talk about your blog specifically and even your writing style. Because when I've been reading your blog over the last few weeks, I feel like there's a sincerity to what you're saying, and even though you're preaching what you believe, it never comes across as a lecture or that you're trying to force your opinions on anyone else. It's incredibly encouraging and relatable and accessible and comforting. And I wondered whether that was a style that you've just always had since you started writing, or if it's something that you saw worked and you've kind of lent into.
I think that it's a style that I've always had. Like as a fresh-faced 19-year-old living in a train station in India, I was like, wow, everything is so, this fried butter is the best thing I've ever eaten. My mate Raj is the best person I've ever met. That monkey is the most hilarious thing I've ever seen. I was just like, I wanted to share this with people, and I think there really is no wrong way to travel. I think that as long as you do something to get out of your comfort zone and to learn a little bit about the place you're traveling through, I don't want to judge anybody. I don't want to say, hey, you should go to India, you should go to Pakistan. Nah, look, if you're from inner London and you've never left inner London, go to Brighton. Just do something to get out of your comfort zone and to see somewhere different, And I think that there is quite a lot of high horse style of encouragement out there within the travel niche. And I think it's important just to understand that everybody's got their own internal struggles, everybody's got their own comfort zone. As long as people are being brave within their realm, then that absolutely should be encouraged and applauded.
That's amazing. Will, you've talked a lot about the entrepreneurial spirit and that sort of thing. I also want to talk to you about your hostel in Bali, because I think there is some interesting ground to cover there. And first and foremost, we're a podcast about travel stories, so we've just got to hear some travel stories that you've accrued. You've obviously just done a lot of traveling aside from all the entrepreneurship. So we'll want to dive into that. But first, I don't know about you, but I need to take a brief moment, recollect my thoughts, and go on a meditation break.
Beautiful.
There we go, from selling Indian trinkets to tours to all kinds of blogs and writings and creation. It's Will Hatton from thebrokebackpacker.com. Will, I'm wondering if you have any specific stories in mind from your time travelling that you'd like to share with the audience, something that encaptures everything that you believe about travel in some sense, some real cool memories from the road.
Yeah, I've got a few. I'm going to dive in with the best one because, why not? So I started this trip trying to head from England to Papua New Guinea without flying. That was my whole goal. And I hitchhiked all across Europe, drove up through Turkey, Georgia, into Iran, where I met this girl in the cafe who was the most beautiful girl I'd ever seen in my life. And we chatted for 12 hours, and then I left, and I wandered on to Kurdistan, where I was due to meet a friend, but there was deep, deep snow, and she was texting me, and she was like, come back to Tehran, it's warm. So I went back to Tehran, converted to Islam, we got married, and then we hitchhiked all around Iran together. And that was a really crazy experience for me to be with somebody who was willing to roll with my style of travel. I mean, we're living in a tent, we were hitchhiking, we were building fires on the side of the road, cooking our own food. And it was just a really inspiring experience to meet somebody who was up for that style of life. I then went to Pakistan, and then she joined me in India, and that's where the journey kind of took a different turn, because she flew out to join me in India. She's on her Iranian passport. She had about $50 in her PayPal. That's what she could contribute. I had like maybe £500 at that point. That was about it. It was really not very much. And suddenly I'm like, oh, okay, so now we've got to like somehow scale up this blog so it can support two people, like somehow. So that very much changed my lifestyle, and we had to like sit down and figure it out and work our asses off. And that was an incredibly important moment on my journey, to have a reason to change what I was doing. Because prior to that, I was very happy traveling around on $10 a day. You know, I'd make the occasional bit of money from like some collaboration where I'd be like, okay, now I can sleep in a hostel, I can drink some beer, boom, happy, you know. But to have somebody who believed in me and who wanted to build a life with me, who required me to take my entrepreneurial spirit and the blog to the next level, that was like a very important moment for me, for sure.
That's exceptional. I love the way you just distilled it down for the purposes of the podcast. I really appreciate that, Will. But just talking about your initial idea to get to Papua New Guinea, how long was the period where you were sort of maybe accepting to yourself that that was now not the plan? Were you really stubborn about it, or is that plant still there growing inside you? That seed, as it were?
I'm glad that you've asked, because next year I am building out a bus and I'm going to start again. And this time I'm not going to get married. I'm not going to convert to Islam. I'm just going to go. I'm going to drive that bus. I haven't quite figured out the India to Myanmar border crossing bit yet, but I reckon it'll be doable somehow. So yeah, no, it was hard to let go of that dream. I'd carved out like 2-3 years to do that dream, and that whole trip had come about because I was looking at a map and I was like, where's the furthest from the UK that you could maybe do in like a straight line? I was like, I could get to Singapore and then build a raft and try and raft my way to Papua New Guinea. You'll be pleased to know the raft part of the plan has now been retired. I'm going to hopefully get a little sailing boat instead. But yeah, no, I'm actually planning on restarting that journey next year. So that'll be exciting.
Let that be a lesson to the listening audience, because I think it's so incredible. Just like if you practice every day, you can jump a little bit higher and one day you'll be able to slam dunk a basketball. If you travel enough and keep on traveling, eventually it will be within the realms of your experience to just get a bus and travel around Papua New Guinea. This is the thing that travel experience bestows upon you.
Absolutely.
I want to mention as well, I think it's a recurring theme that happens in tropology, is this idea of love being sort of an antithesis to travel, or something that rarely can coexist with travel but occasionally does. And I think that's got a really interesting counterplay. Travel is so often, or it so often becomes like a soliloquy, right? It's an individual story that we have as travelers. And I myself am constantly like weighing up this idea of companionship, both with friends and loved ones or relationships, and these very rigid ideas I have in my mind of the kind of trip that I want to do for myself. So it's really interesting that you met someone that made you want to change your plans somewhat, and then B, how attractive it was to you that it was someone that was willing to go with the flow and insert themselves into your adventure. Can you expand and talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just meeting somebody who was so adventurous in spirit as me, and like I'd met people who had wanted to insert themselves into my plans before, but only because they wanted to go on an adventure and they weren't really able to contribute, right?
Yeah.
This chick was amazing. She was amazing. You know, like we very much shared the load of figuring out this challenging journey. And I think that having, you know, a sexy best friend suddenly on the road with me was just very, very appealing. But ultimately, I do feel that, you know, like you say, traveling in relationships, it's a tricky business. It's a tricky business. So I've got some thoughts on that, but that could take some time.
Well, I guess, do you regard that as having been a really positive experience in the most part, like better to have loved than lost kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we were together for 4 years. We got divorced. Like, we're still on good terms. She's an amazing lady. Like, really a very, very impressive human. Um, but I feel like for me, like when I'm dating now and meeting new people, I'm like, hey, so like I'm available for like 3 months of the year, and the rest of the time
Yeah.
I'm doing my own thing. And if that doesn't work for you, that's cool. And also, like, I don't do monogamy, so that's the deal. And like, you'd be surprised, most people are up for it.
Well, there you go. I too have the whole sexy best friend thing, but for me, I started a podcast with them. Adam, what are your thoughts?
Well, aside from going red, aside from blushing, yeah, it's difficult. Long-term relationships are difficult in general, and Alan and I fight this every week. So, yeah, we can relate somewhat. Regarding you first going travelling, I'm really interested to know what or who was your inspiration, because you started quite a lot younger than lots of people do. I think the average age now, I was reading an article the other day, I think the average age of a backpacker nowadays it's somewhere in between 20 to 25 years old. But you started at 19, and in terms of your childhood or how you grew up, was there anyone or anything in your life that really sparked your wanderlust?
So they weren't in my life, and hopefully you might have heard of this fellow, but Bruce Parry, who ran a program called Tribe, in which he would go and immerse himself in a tribe for a month at a time all around the world. I was just like, I want to be this guy. Like, this is amazing. He's going and he's having these incredible experiences, and he's not just passing through. He's there for a month. He's invested. He's really like making friends and making connections and learning about the traditions of these communities that he's passing through. And as for like how I ended up hitting the road so young, my whole plan was always to join the army. That's like what I wanted to do. So I wanted to toughen myself up. I wanted to push myself out of my comfort zone. And I was young and stupid, so I was like, I'm going to go and blow people up in far-flung lands, and that'll make me into a better human. And I'm really glad that didn't happen. Really, really glad. But anyway, I ended up having like a pretty life-changing injury when I was 19 and recovering from that for a while. And with it came like, I put on a ton of weight. I was very depressed. I was very unhappy. I had to like move back in with my parents. It was like, it really wasn't what I wanted and where I expected to be, and I could no longer join the army. So I was like, well, do you know what? Like, I'm just going to go to India. And the reason I chose India was because I could get a 2-year visa, which meant I knew I could just hang out there for 2 years and figure it out. So I went to India with really no plans at all. I had a few couchsurfing contacts written down on a piece of paper, and I was like, this is going to toughen me up, and it did.
Can you work on that 2-year visa as well?
I think so. I mean, I did some
It's just
help-ex, work-away style projects whilst I was there. I served a few drinks in a few bars, but I don't think you can officially work there, no.
gotcha. So it's interesting. You were so young when you first started. I started when I was 21, but you mentioned that you wanted to join the army to toughen yourself up. Maybe we could talk a little bit about self-consciousness as a vector for travel. I know that for me, travel was a huge confidence building thing. And one of the key reasons why I went traveling and then carried on traveling was because it made me feel good about myself. It's interesting that you felt like you were somehow lacking. You wanted to toughen up, and then travel obviously became a medium where you fulfilled that kind of want. So can we talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I literally like couldn't even talk to girls. Like, literally just could not even like have a conversation with a girl. Like, I was just like so shy and so like unsure of myself, and I felt like I had 2 left hands and 2 left feet, and I felt like I was an incapable human being. I hadn't yet discovered that I was quite good at writing and enjoyed to write. So I thought, oh, I'm not really particularly good at anything. And by being out there on the road where, like, if something breaks, I had to fix it. If I got lost, I had to figure it out. If I needed to figure out what was going on, I had to find the answers, right? I had to interact with people. And having to do that meant that over time it just got much easier. And then I found that I really enjoyed communicating with people, and I really enjoyed putting myself in situations where I would have like a 10-second panic attack because I was like, oh my God, I have no idea how I'm going to get outside of a tent and like plug back in the fucking ropes because the wind's going crazy and I'm freezing and there's a hole in my sleeping bag. And I'm like, okay, now you have to solve this problem or you're going to freeze to death. So you'd go outside and you'd fix it, you know? And once you'd done that, you were like, yeah, cool, I've learned a new skill.
It's the ultimate like way to exercise independence, isn't it? It's almost by force you have to be independent. And I think it's so cool that we often have people write to us like, I want to travel, but I'm not the most confident person. I'm a little bit socially awkward. You're an example of someone who felt like they weren't that confident, couldn't speak to girls, like hadn't exercised that independence, and traveling like solved that for you.
It really did, yeah, 100%. I think that like traveling, and then also having the introspective space whilst traveling to start up a journaling practice, and then like later on in life I found a gym, and those three things have just been like the most foundational things for me, like gaining confidence and gaining skills.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Another thing I wanted to just mention, to be completely transparent, is this strange feeling I have when I enter a hostel, and I guess this is topical because you own one, Will, is that whenever I go into a new hostel, if I see people, I might have mentioned this on the podcast before, Al, but if I see a group of backpackers sitting down, they might be at the breakfast table or sitting in the common room, I automatically assume that they're already friends, that they're all a group of friends, as opposed to being an individual, or, you know, a group of individuals, as it were. I feel like they've all been there for a long time. Perhaps they've been traveling for a while through different countries. And even that little anxiety after, you know, traveling around for what is probably a decade now, I just wondered if anyone else has ever experienced that, or if you if it resonates with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I've walked into rooms and done a 180 and walked out again twice as fast, because I've been like, oh my God, a group, I can't handle a group. And I go into the bathroom and I'm like, okay, man, look in the mirror, you got this. You're going to go back, you're going to say a hearty ahoy, you're going to pull out your deck of cards, and it's going to be fine. And it's always fun.
Yeah, it's always fine. It's this crazy perception. And I think we experience this a lot in day-to-day life of being like confident travelers. But I mean, truth is, there's often scenarios. Just because we do a podcast where we practice our verbal acuity doesn't mean that that manifests itself all the time in day-to-day life. It's just through practice and determination, right? Like you do that 180, you prep yourself, you think, I'm going to do this, you perk yourself up and you go and get it done. I think that extroversion sometimes can be a choice. There's extroverted people and introverted people, but you can force yourself to do stuff.
Absolutely. I think a huge part of it as well is just trying to be kind to yourself, and, you know, like be gentle with yourself, be nice to yourself, like celebrate little wins, and don't be too hard on yourself if you're feeling shy, because everyone feels like that at some point.
Another thing you said that's really cool is this idea of you didn't know that you were good at writing. And I want to point out how great travel is at helping you find the things that you're good at. I've just had so many experiences that I would never have had if I'd stayed at home. Staying at home means that you end up on a sort of single track where you can somewhat diversify your skill set. But with traveling, you can really try such a plethora of different things, and you're such great evidence of that. Let's talk about that hostel that you set up. What was the idea behind starting it, and how's that journey been?
It's been a long journey. I do not recommend starting a new travel-based business in the middle of a global pandemic. Not fun, honestly, lads. Yeah, I was really struggling to find a hostel where I could still like have access to all of the best parts of the backpacker community, but where I could also get work done. And, you know, like, as I'm sure you guys know, when you're trying to film a podcast episode, just trying to find like a quiet corner sometimes can be really challenging, let alone a quiet corner with good lighting, maybe some AC if you're lucky, and like decent Wi-Fi. So me and my business partner, Mark, we were basically coming at this from different directions, but finding the same problem in that we wanted access to the backpacker community. We wanted access to like backpacker events, but we also wanted to be able to work whilst traveling. So we couldn't find anything. So basically we built it, and it took 3 years to build. It's not quite finished because we kind of ran out of money, but it's coming slowly. You can stay in it. I mean, it's good enough to stay in. We've got a big pool. We've got a pool table with like a pink felt cover. There's multiple versions of Settlers of Catan. Everything you need. And then we've also got like our co-working booths and like standing desks, and we've got AC meeting rooms on the way. So yeah, it's coming together, and it's been really positively received by like digital nomads, aspiring entrepreneurs, remote workers like us, who have also really struggled, because a lot of folks would find that in order to get their work done and to not be too distracted, they would end up staying in like a little guest house or whatever, where they weren't meeting anybody, and then they would end up being quite lonely on their travels. And then you're just working in your room all the time, and it's like, is this much better than being at home? Obviously, the answer is still definitely yes, but like that thought goes through your mind. So it's been a really fun journey to provide this space.
Yeah, I know that we've said, Alan, haven't we, many times, that when it comes to recording an episode or two whilst we're on the road, it doesn't matter if I'm in Japan or he's in Belize, sometimes we were saying we've just got to put our hands in our pockets and pay for a hotel for a couple of days, perhaps.
Yeah.
And that's not always viable, and it's also not really what we want to do. I suppose there is this priority sort of hierarchy that you have to come up with, but I'm interested to know, and I'm sure that this is the case, people are now coming to Tribal as a destination, are they? Are you seeing a flow of backpackers who come through and then end up staying there, but as well as people who deliberately come to Bali to stay at your hostel and work?
Yeah, both. So we end up with people who stay 4, 6, 8 weeks sometimes. And we also end up with people who know that they, like, especially amongst remote workers, people who are like less flexible with what they have to get done in a week and what calls they have to make. They're coming to us. Like, we are the first custom-built co-working hostel in Bali. There's a few decent co-working spaces around, but none of them have accommodation, and it means it's more like an office vibe. And don't get me wrong, some of them are really good, but it's more like an office vibe where you don't have the opportunity to meet other people. And like the difference with what we've put together is you can do your work all day, but at the end of the day, you've got your restaurant, you've got your bar, you've got your board games, you've got your pool, you've got your sunset, you've got like your yoga pad, you've got everything you need, right? And I think that providing that space we're full most of the time, so it's been very popular.
And you're there, you're like customer facing, interacting with guests and stuff in that hostel. Do you have the time for that?
Yes and no. Like, I'm down there like 2-3 days a week. I was down there more initially, but like we didn't want to build a business that was reliant on me. We wanted to build something which can be run by our Balinese team. Like 20 of them, they're all absolutely amazing. Like, it's been really a fun experience working in this space. I knew nothing about hospitality, nothing whatsoever. And like, it's been really interesting to like figure that out and build the team and build the systems. So I am down there. Like, when we have social events, I'm usually down there getting a little bit silly. But no, we didn't want to build it around me. I think that would make it very difficult to expand this to like a 10 hostel operation, which is our plan eventually.
Amazing. It sounds like a really cool space, man. What's the best way for the Tripology audience to find that if they find themselves in Bali? What do they do?
Just check it out on Instagram. It's just called Tribal Bali on Instagram, and or you can find me and drop me a little DM and challenge me to a game of pool, and I'll see you there.
There we go. And your Instagram is Will Hatton __, correct?
Correct. Nicely done.
There we go. No problem at all. There we go. Well, it's the only hostel in Bali that Tripology recommends. So absolutely check out the Tribal Hostel in Bali.
That's brilliant. Will, do you think, as a serial entrepreneur and an extremely successful long-term backpacker, do you think that both of those share fundamental principles?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think planning for sure. Like, you can obviously just go around Europe or go to Thailand and just figure it out as you go. If you want to go to somewhere like Pakistan or Iran or Venezuela or Myanmar or Palestine, these places require more planning. It requires a little bit more discipline, a little bit more thorough thinking. And that is something that I think lends itself well to being successful in entrepreneurship as well. I also think like attitude is really, really important. Like, I'm a pretty positive, optimistic person. Like, I like to be hopeful. I like to try and see the funny when things go wrong. And I think that, as you guys will know, especially if you're traveling in countries where, like, you're told the bus is going to take a mere 14 hours and then it takes 30 hours. All you can really do is find the funny, right? So, like, I feel like that positive mindset, that optimism, that humorous attitude, like that is something that is very useful in entrepreneurship as well, because entrepreneurship is often 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Yeah, and there seems to be this. There's an adaptability as well. You have to innovate to a certain extent. Relationship management, which is huge. I think most jobs, it's sort of 80, 90% you're dealing with people, right?
Yeah.
Whether they're your boss or a customer. And then from you and your travels as well, there seems to be this relentless, a relentlessness to continue the trip, whether you are building a business or you are, hitchhiking around it, right? There's nothing that can stop you, because so many people, the vast majority of people, would have turned home many times before you did.
Yeah, I do think that having just a general attitude of not giving up is pretty important. I think that with both my early travels and my early entrepreneurship, like, the failure was not an option. There was nowhere to go. My back was very much up against the wall. And what I have found, to be totally honest with you, is since my back has not been so up against the wall over the last year, from like a financial point of view, from like if you don't get this done, you are so incredibly fucked. Like, my drive, it's still there, it's still strong. It's not as strong as it used to be. Like, when you've bet everything, when you've bet the farm on your travels and your entrepreneurship and your success and your ability to unwind something and to figure out the puzzle, how can you not be successful, right?
I often think about what's the chief skill of the traveler and what's the chief skill of the entrepreneur and all that stuff. And I think that, like, your ability to metabolize stress through humor, your tenacity, the relentlessness, these are all things that the traveler should possess, and they're all things that the entrepreneur should possess as well. I think that's a really valuable insight.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree.
So there we go. I mean, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the podcast. I think that's been an amazing conversation. Anyone who has any comments or things to say about what they've heard today should email us at tropologypodcast@gmail.com. They can find us on all social media at tropologypodcast. They can visit Will Hatton's Instagram at willhatton__ and check out thebrokebackpacker.com. It's an amazing resource for everyone in the listening audience who's interested in inexpensive, cool, experiential budget travel. And of course, Tribal Hostel in Bali. What an amazing space. What an amazing resource. Will, I hope you'll join us on the Lost and Found section of our podcast. It's an informal chat that we have after the episode. It's exclusive to our Patreon subscribers, so we'll see you there. Adam, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling like the present day is becoming such an oppressive burden that I want to jump on a sort of proverbial rocket and blast off into the future, into next week, and experience the levity of the future.
I agree wholeheartedly. Thanks ever so much for your time, Will. Absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. That was fantastic.
It's been a joy. We'll see you all next week. Bye.
See ya. Bye.